You are listening to Missed Apex Podcast. We live F1. Here at Missed Apex Podcast, we consider ourselves trend setters, and that's why we had an F1 strategist on Missed Apex Podcast before it was cool. Joining Matt and I today is Mike Caulfield, who was a strategist at Mercedes and at Haas. How's it going, Mike?
Hey, yeah, good to be back.
First question, who do you prefer, the Mercedes team or the Haas team? Who were the best? I wouldn't say sporting-wise, but who were just the better human beings?
I mean, the great guys at both teams, so I can't really split them out between the two there.
Okay, but let me be nosy. There must have been a massive difference in atmospheres between probably the more corporate Mercedes team and then maybe more of a privateer attitude in the Haas garage.
Yeah, I mean, there are obviously different. There's the massive scales to the teams which are different. So obviously, yeah, you got your Mercedes who are close to 1,000 people. Haas is, yeah, I mean, at best for 200, 250. And I guess my role was slightly different between the two because I was traveling a lot more with the Haas. Well, I was traveling full time with Haas, whereas Mercedes, I was mainly factory based. So it's you're also with different groups of people. But again, at Mercedes, there was a really good atmosphere back at the kind of race support where you're having like 20 odd people. A lot of them are students, so close to kind of my age at that time, not anymore.
It was a long time ago, Mike.
Whereas, and I think one thing to say about Mercedes, I mean, it's maybe gradually starting to change now. Obviously, you had James go over to Williams, but a lot of the kind of trackside engineers have been trackside since basically the BAR days. So there's not been a huge turnaround in like a lot of the people there. So it's yeah, it was quite a. I guess when you're fresh into F1, a little bit, what's the word? Daunting to go with like these kind of people when you're kind of fresh and young, and you got these experienced guys. Whereas Haas, yeah, I was fresh in. They're obviously a smaller team, and then there's a lot of guys but you're all chipping in a little bit more because of that aspect. So there's definitely different atmospheres between the two, but. Yeah, I can't kind of split them. I've still got good friends at both teams, so it's I can't really say which one's better.
Oh. Well, look, I tried my best to get some raunchy insight there, but that's an interesting thing you say about Mercedes, where essentially when people aren't moving on because they're successful, it's kind of like dead man's shoes. So you're waiting for someone to retire or get sacked, and obviously while everything's going well, there's little opportunity for movement. So I guess someone like James Vowles eventually. To go into a team principal role, they're going to have to move away. But it does seem like Mercedes, they're the sort of organisation that is encouraging people and would be happy for James to do that and thrive. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing. And he didn't have to do any kind of gardening leave of any extent, maybe a couple of months when they just go off into what is a very senior role. And I mean, maybe it might have been different if he was approached to go to kind of Ferrari or Red Bull for some reason, but to go into someone like Williams, which obviously Toto has a bit of history with as it is, maybe that sweetened the deal a little bit. But yeah, I mean, even when I was there and like back in the really competitive days, I know when like kind of guys from Aero or stuff were going to like Alpine or Racing Point as it was at the time, they were still kept involved pretty much right until the leave date. They might have had like maybe only a couple of weeks, kind of a month or so. I mean, these are kind of less senior roles, so maybe like your head of aerodynamics might have been pushed aside a little bit more, but it was very encouraging at Merck. Even when I would like left to go to Haas, the same thing. I worked right up until my leave date. I had no gardening leave whatsoever, so it's They were quite trusting in that sense to certain teams, I imagine.
I might have been talking about gardening leave a bit recently. And one of the things that I was curious about, especially because I see that in the more junior roles, that there tends to be less emphasis on it. Is that because, especially at teams like Mercedes, you'd be very sort of compartmentalized with regards to the information you had as sort of like if I was a junior aero person looking at, I don't know, like the left rear corner of the car or the brake ducts there. There's not a huge amount of stuff that I'm going to take to like a Red Bull or Ferrari or direct competitor. Whereas maybe if I'm in a more senior role, I have a much broader view of the overall concept and design of the car.
Great question.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much nailed on in a certain sense, for especially when it comes to your designers. Yeah, I think the more senior you are, the more you potentially know about the processes and the actual designs, and I guess as well, like someone like Mercedes and why they've been so successful over the previous years, they used to have kind of a split between like 3 design teams. They'd have a current year, the next year, and the year after that, all working on it. So you potentially where you are in that process would also depend on like how much information you may be going. If there was someone like working, say for example, now there's people starting to work with the 2026 regulations. It's kind of still quite new at the moment. Maybe that's fine, but as you get closer, if you've built up a couple of years of knowledge and experience, then there might be kind of an extent where, right, no, you've got a lot of information, we don't want you to go somewhere. But it's also quite interesting in terms of, I guess there's that kind of that etiquette. I mean, you obviously can't forget your stuff. You can't forget things you've learned, but at the same time, you're supposed to be kind of professional about it. Like it's quite strange. Even as at Mercedes, I wasn't like the head of strategy. I wasn't any. I was just a strategy engineer there. But I actually tended to find out a lot more which was going on at a team like Mercedes than I did when I was at Haas. And it was the one thing that really surprised me actually, but they weren't shy in kind of sharing information. And then maybe it's different in certain departments, but for myself anyway, I got to know a lot of information, which helped me as well learning my career. And again, it was that kind of sensibility. Before I left, it was kind of a case of, well, there's certain things you can take, certain things you can't. You can't unlearn it, but just be sensible about what you do. And because obviously if it comes out, we know it's come from you. So it's kind of that kind of...
Okay, so for a second there, I thought you were going to say, oh, it's down to honour and integrity, but really it's because it would be quite easy for it to get busted. Oh, Caulfield's gone over to Haas, and all of a sudden they've got our, like, S-duct tracking. There's only one way they could have got that. It's a good question, Matt. Well done.
Yeah, I was like, oh, look, Haas has DAS all of a sudden. Where did that come from?
Yeah, but look, the real reason we've got you here is to grill you about some strategy stuff. And I saw you tweeting shortly after the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, because on paper, from a strategy side, it kind of looked pretty simple. The safety car shook things up. But how did you see that? Because from our amateur point of view, we want to be good armchair strategists. And certainly in the last few seasons, we've got very used to undercut being king. Is that still the case?
It's going to vary circuit on circuit now, I think. I think somewhere like Saudi, with the degradation, which was quite low, it wasn't as strong as it would be, and especially like you said, with the safety car coming out, obviously that negates the undercut anyway. But yeah, you're looking for kind of big deltas between tires, and for a start, a lot of things kind of go into the hard tire. That hard tire is potentially a little bit slower at the beginning of a stint, so that already harms the undercut, because even though you're going onto a tire which can go longer, that initial warm-up might be a little bit slower, and you just don't get that kind of pace advantage going to it, even though your soft or mediums you're running the first had already degraded. But I wouldn't say it's not an option. I think in certain tracks you'll still see the undercut, which will be quite strong. Like in Bahrain, the undercut was still strong. I think in Saudi it was just a bit lower degradation. The tires were just that little bit more.
So that's quite key. So what we're saying is more degradation gives you more options when it comes to the undercut. So Bahrain, known for being quite an abrasive track. Say for example, Alonso and Aston Martin were really aggressive with the undercut and kind of threw everyone. They sort of dragged Mercedes out of their set strategy and put them on the defensive.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, you've answered your own question.
Sorry. I just wanted to show off. I wanted to show off that I've learned some things from you over these interviews, Mike.
No, but yeah, yes, you got the high degradation. Yeah, you got more chance of an undercut going on there. So but also it's that kind of crossover, because if you go pull it too early, you're not obviously as high on the degradation curve. So at that point, you don't get that as big benefit going to it. So it's that kind of balance between when you go to start forcing other people in or not.
So the undercut is more effective the longer you go into that stint. So it's almost like a game of chicken.
Yeah, and also the thing is as well is because as you go earlier in the stint, the field's not spread out as much as well. So you're more likely to go also drop into traffic. So also you're looking for that window where you can drop into free air, and that point also where you've got enough benefit of going onto a fresh set of tyres compared to a tyre which is sighted to the grade, yeah.
Well, I had a sort of follow-up question for that seemed to be particularly the case at Jeddah, which is how much does being in, say, a DRS train affect your tire degradation?
It's an interesting one. I guess it depends on how much you're being actually restricted in terms of pace. So if you're in a DRS train, you can't overtake, but you feel once you're in free air, you can go a second a lap faster. You're actually protecting your tyres in that instance because you're not actually using your car to its full potential. So you're actually limited by the car who's leading that train. And he's probably actually using his tyres up more because he's having to defend. He's having to kind of make sure he gets all his entries, exits, all that correctly. Whereas you're kind of just thinking, oh, I haven't quite got the pace to overtake him. So I'd just sit here and wait as such. So like someone like, I think a primary example of it is kind of, it's Leclerc's stint on the soft, and then everyone went, oh, the softs were really good in that first stint. But actually, his degradation was only probably lower because his pace was actually masked early on because he was stuck in traffic with cars which were slower than him. If he'd been in free air throughout, you'd actually probably seen his actually degradation would have been normal. So you've got to kind of pace correct it for actually the traffic he's in and relative to his actual pace. And you also saw that's why he came in about lap 15, 16. I think his tyres were probably actually close to being done by that point, which is why he came in. I mean, there's actually one other reason which he didn't actually need to, which actually cost him in the end because of the safety car coming out 2 laps later. But that's just something they may have missed at the time and weren't catching up on.
Well, I think, did he not come in like right after Max finally passed him on the medium? So maybe that was just an attempt to stay close.
Well, Max was just about to pass him, so he would have passed him down that straight and dived into the pits. What he'd actually done, I think, looking at it, I think that might have been a slight reason because obviously he'd lost a bit of time. But actually, Stroll was just being pushed out his window. So Stroll had already made his stop, and he was actually falling out his pit window. And on that lap, Stroll was actually just edging out the window. So it was a chance for Ferrari and Leclerc to actually overcut him in that sense. What they actually failed to realise by looking kind of at GPS or something, but Stroll's issue had already started. So the reason he was dropping out wasn't to do with tyres or anything, it's because his issue had already started. So if you looked at his straight line speed, he was just going slower and slower every lap. So they didn't actually need to kind of do that. So even if they'd got overtaken by Verstappen and then made the stop the next lap, they would have still probably pushed out Stroll, and obviously Stroll would have stopped. And obviously if they could have pushed that a little bit longer, they would have taken benefit of the safety car as well.
Yeah, I love the fact that we are brand new talking about Ferrari strategy errors in races here. I want to talk about Hamilton on the hard tire, but before I do, I went back and looked through all the various pit stops because Pirelli puts out the very nice infographic. And I wanted to, like originally I was like, Stroll, we want to talk about that. I'm curious about that. And then I realized that pretty much the entire midfield, with the sole exception of, I think, of Sargent, actually pitted before the safety car and like really a bit earlier than I would have anticipated based on the strategy guidance Pirelli gave. Do you know, can you explain to me why that came about?
So looking at it, I mean, I obviously, and it's always the caveat I always put on it, it's like, I don't know the full ins and outs of teams. I don't know if it's like pre-planned in certain aspects or kind of there's an issue maybe with the cars. Some cars may be like slightly worse on tyres than others. But from what I look at it, it actually all starts from Piastri's stop on lap 1. So actually Piastri starts coming back into the window, and Norris, obviously they've had their 2-1s for nose changes on lap 1 and lap 2. And then as they start coming in close to the window, you get Magnussen stopping and Bottas stopping. And then obviously that then causes a chain reaction for the other midfield cars to then stop there and cover it off basically in that respect. So it's all kicked off of trying to cover, because I think the belief was, even though Pirelli sent out that infographic, that the hard could last the whole race. So I think it was that interesting one that if you may be struggling at that point on your mediums, you don't want to cause too much time and you've got to try and cover off, put yourself in free air, the hard's going to lift anyway. Whereas if you maybe leave it a couple of laps later, all right, you're more than likely going to be able to overtake overtake the McLaren, but you're going to lose that, cost that little bit of time doing that overtake, and then someone around you may either prevent the undercut or even get the overcut. So you just take that kind of safety option of covering off and putting yourself in free air, really.
Okay, well, I mean, I think we saw Piastri did the whole race -1 lap on the hard tires, so they wouldn't have been wrong about that. And so just to follow up with my Hamilton question real quick, if you don't mind, it seems like he got a little bit toasted by the timing of that safety car, because it looked like to me he was actually starting to get faster on those tires. Like there was a long stretch of time where they were going to be quite quick once they finally came in.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'll admit I was surprised that Hamilton started on the hards. And again, I don't know the ins and outs. I'm not going to criticize them. They'll obviously have the reasons. I was actually expecting Verstappen to start on the hards, because being out of position with a very fast car, it's a strategy which will work regardless of kind of what happens. But Hamilton started on the hards last year and started on the hards this year, and the exact same things basically happened in 2 years. Where a safety car comes out around this point, which destroys any race if you start on that hard tyre. Like if you get a safety car around the lap 30 region, 28 to like 34, you're laughing because you're in that window, you gain an extra time, and you're on fresh tyres compared to everyone else towards the end. But now he has to take that because obviously the field packs back up, and now he's on a set of tyres which, okay, they can last to the end, but it's not premium to run the mediums for 30 laps.
So basically, when that safety car came out, it negated all the work of, okay, let's get these hards further into the race and then come out with fresh, stickier tyres on a lower fuel load and start making stuff up. So effectively, exactly, Mercedes gambled that there wasn't going to be a safety car at a track where there's definitely going to be a safety car.
I wouldn't say not a safety car. I think they were just hoping there was going to be a safety car a bit later. But it's an interesting view they take, because it's a strategy you do kind of if you feel your car's out of position. So like I said, with a Verstappen, you've got a fast car, but qualifying issues meant you're midway down the pack. So it just allows you to do something different, because ultimately, if you're out of position and you do the same as everything else, you're only going to kind of gain what you can gain on track, whereas this one gives you that opportunity to make bigger gains. So when like Hamilton, I can't remember exactly where he qualified, 7th, I think it was. It's like, I mean, unfortunately, that's not really where he's out of place for the Mercedes. That's around the pace of the car, around that kind of 4th to 7th position. So you could have probably gained as many places on a standard medium hard strategy and just going for the undercut, going for a good start performance, which you'd get off a medium tyre over a hard anyway. And then you potentially gain a couple places, or like say a car falls out in front and you've got a chance of a podium, where like basically like what Russell happened to Russell basically, but he's on the edge of a podium. And there's that opportunity. So I'm other than like hoping for a late safety car, for me it just seemed a strange choice considering they did exactly this last year and it didn't work for them last year either.
Okay, let's talk about Russell real quick. Looking at it, felt like at the time he began to filibuster to not let Hamilton go by because Lewis was on different tire strategy, that there was enough tire left for Lewis to actually bother the Ferrari ahead, maybe fight a little bit and slow them down. And had he done that, that would have brought the both of them back to Russell, who obviously had good tires at the end of the race. Do you think that was a bit of a missed opportunity? Like if you were in charge, would you have let Lewis by at that point? That's really what I want to know.
I mean, it's
just on the numbers. Somebody else's problem to deal with the drivers after the race. Just on the numbers.
Don't worry about the personalities or egos.
Yeah, okay. On the numbers, yeah. For me, if you got two cars together, one's clearly quick at the point, yeah, given that opportunity. Yeah, it would have, like you said, if the worst case happens, he goes ahead, he doesn't cause any issues with the anyone in front, and then you just invert them later on again. So, in best case, he actually gains position and the team moves out. So, like in terms of the team point of view, yeah, I didn't really see what the benefit of not giving him a chance anyway was, other than politics. Yeah.
So what we said, I think after the race, was that Russell basically ruined his own strategy in a way, because his strategy would have been to conserve tyres at that phase, but it was more important for him to stay ahead of Lewis Hamilton, use up a little bit of the tyres and go, no, I'm faster. But obviously that affects your strategy later. But what that tells me from a political point of view, in an unearned guess, is that I think Russell is set out in that team as the number 2 driver, but he knows if he can score little wins, there is just a chance that he gets far enough ahead that he is then, considered the number 1 driver at some point, and maybe that convinces Lewis Hamilton that enough's enough, and there's a big political game going on there. It was a little cheeky from Russell. I've got the feeling that the dynamic in that team is, on paper, of course you can race, but I think that is still Hamilton's team, and Russell is very much being looked at for the future. It was such a great insight into everyone's minds.
Yeah, I think from my experience with Mercedes, I kind of expected this was going to be the case last year, and then obviously things happened, and my kind of thought, based on no knowledge whatsoever, just guessing.
Guess. We don't mind. It's missed Apex. Hey, look, if you get on the big boys ones, they're going to want a little bit more, caveat. You're in the shed, Mike. Don't worry about it.
This is the big one. But yeah, I thought last year would be a case of, if they had a competitive car, let Lewis win his 8th championship, support him, and then the team shows afterwards. So in terms of this year, I kind of feel they're more on an even footing this year, and it's. I don't know as well, with the kind of change in kind of structure and everything which has happened with the team. I don't know whether they are now kind of starting to look at the future and almost kind of, ruled out this season. I mean, well, we can rule out this season. Red Bull's going to win all 23, but that's...
I think it's up for grabs for Russell more this season. So Russell could stamp himself as the number 1 this season. It wasn't really on last season. Yeah. Whatever was happening with the experiments and points. Sorry, Matt.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Go on, Mike. Sorry.
No. Yeah, I agree with you as well. I kind of feel that, they're free to race, and I don't think that either of them is going to get any special treatment this year.
Matthew?
Well, there is one other team on the grid with a similar-ish situation, and that would be Red Bull, where Perez scored a win. But the question I have for you, because you've watched 2 races and you've seen them, it just, from the outside, looks like Red Bull has a much more neutral car, that Perez is able to drive a lot closer to Max. I mean, I was really impressed with his second stint when the 2 of them were both in free air. Max wasn't really making any headway. Does he have maybe a little bit more of a chance at extra race wins? Or do you really think he's, as everyone is quote unquote saying, that he's much more circuit specific?
I'd agree with you. I kind of feel that the car does look a little bit better suited to Perez this year. I mean, and like you said, that second stint was, he knew what Max was doing and he just matched him. So it was a very deserved win, and literally Max couldn't do anything about it. Whether is it circuit specific? Potentially. I think Perez does have a style which kind of makes him suit certain circuits better than others, whereas Max is obviously that bit more all round. Anywhere he goes, he's pretty fast and all right, good driver. So I think it'll be interesting to see what happens this weekend as well. I mean, just obviously make sure that there's no reliability issues for Perez either.
Oh, reliability issues. That's interesting, because there was a quote unquote drive shaft problem in the race, but Eddie Jordan, who, as I've always said, speaks truth and nothing but the truth, said on the Formula 4 Success podcast, I think Max concocted something about a drive shaft to make himself look good. I'm absolutely convinced that he was told before he went out that if Checo is leading, you do not have permission to pass him. There's some really interesting politics going on there. I don't see that, but what Mr. Jordan's is painting a picture of is basically Max going, nuh-uh, I definitely could have overtaken Perez, but the drive shaft thing. And the whole time the team was going, well, we can't see anything. I mean, it's fine. Eddie Jordan has a reputation for this kind of thing, but it's a fun little snippet.
Yeah, no, I think it'll be interesting this season between the 2 of them. Unfortunately, that's where I think the majority of races we're going to have to look for entertainment. So let's hope Perez is generally closer to it.
I'm a little bit curious because Ferrari, who we've talked about their mistakes already, came out after the race. I think it was Carlos Sainz, and said that the issue they're having with the car, and especially with managing the tires, is one that they feel they have correlation with in the wind tunnel. So question one is, have you ever been on a team where that sort of a thing has happened? And what are the odds that they could at least make this a bit closer with development in this season, if that statement is true?
So yes, definitely been involved in a team which, has had the issues with the tires. And you can see it. You can see it very. It's generally a case. I mean, I don't know. It could be a number of things, but I think it's kind of issue where you'll have a sudden loss of downforce in certain specific areas of the kind of cornering phase. Unfortunately, that just causes the tires to slide a bit more, and then you're going to struggle to kind of get around it in that respect. So uses tires up more, plus you lose a bit of time. So potentially on a kind of like a 1 lap run, because you're pushing the car to the limit so much, you don't get that issue. But when you're trying to manage it and throughout the run as the tires go, you're just going to slide them, and it just takes that little bit out more. So whether they can develop it to get out of it, I mean, it's that from past experience with team I was with, when they didn't, it was a difficult one. You never quite gain it back. So it's going to be not an easy fix, unless they know exactly what it is. But I mean, if they can see it in the wind tunnel, that's one thing. But actually trying to figure it out, because they're all interlaced parts in terms of this causes this to happen, this causes to happen. So you can't just change one tiny little bit and fix it. So it's well, maybe you can, but it's very rare in an aerodynamic point of view that you can just change one little bit and you're suddenly going to gain all your kind of tyre performance back.
Okay, so fast forward to Interlagos. Where are they on the fastest teams scale by that point? Let's have a guess. Let's have a wag. Let's have a wag.
I'd say they'll be. I mean, they're still going to be up there. They're going to be, well, definitely not first. They're going to be second or third fastest. It just depends on. Yeah, they'll be remain. I mean, the second, third, fourth teams, I think, are going to be very, very much interchangeable throughout the season, depending on what circuit it is. I don't think I don't think really anyone else is going to get up to the point to mixing it with them at that point.
So I just put a little pin in what you were talking about earlier with the strategy, and the thing that stuck out there is it's not all team strategists sat there in an island by themselves. There's this cascade effect when teams start pitting. You get to have a look at how a different tyre is responding. So, Hamilton was like the sacrificial lamb. Everyone got to look at his hard tyre data and see how the hards were doing. But Red Bull were really great for this during the kind of 2017, 2018 period when they were sitting at third but developing well. They would be really aggressive with that undercut, and they sometimes dictated the whole strategy of races. And I think there was a lot of races during that period that would have been one-stops if it wasn't for Red Bull scaring everyone with the undercuts. And so it's a much more kind of dynamic picture than I think we get from our sofas, where we just think, oh, well, we would just do the softs and then the hards, or we would do soft, hard to get through this. Really, it's a very fluid situation.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the Red Bull situation a couple of years back was they were in like that kind of beautiful place in a strategist land where you didn't really have any threats from behind, so you could try and if you didn't do anything really different, you'd end up where you started. So they had that nice place where, right, well, we need to do something a little bit aggressive or a little bit different. And worst thing that happens is, okay, we drop back and we finish 30 seconds behind the leading few, but we're still 30 seconds ahead of everyone else. So there might not be teams who have that kind of benefit this year because the field is that little bit closer together. But yeah, it is very much dynamic, and it's dynamic in a sense that you'll try and plan out a race before you go into it. So like on a Saturday night, Sunday morning, you'll look at a plan. You obviously don't know exactly what's going to happen at the start. You don't know what kind of positions are going to change, who's going to crash out, etc. But you'll have different plans for kind of if you maintain your position, if you gain positions, etc. And then you try and look at kind of your first bit is, well, I want to kind of look at where there's going to be a window opening up, where do we expect our paces to be? So it's going to be a window, and who's going to make that first stop, and depends on what start tide are on, etc. So going into like last weekend, you'll have looked at it, and like they say, those midfield teams, because the pace is quite tight, you generally know if you're a midfield team, if there's been no unexpected pit stops first, the first person to make the stop is going to drop back to basically last on the grid. And you kind of just want to make sure that you're in the right window with your tyres, that you can go into a bit of free air and you can exploit it, and you're not going to kind of in 2 laps catch up with the slowest cars and then mess around fighting with them and etc. And then it'll cause that trigger off there, and it's all about kind of just balancing out that kind of tyre life with where you can get that free air to exploit it.
It's almost like they should be speaking to the strategists on the pit wall and not the CEO at some point, because I'm not sure how much Christian Horner or Seidel or Zach Brown are really involved in that, and that's probably the most interesting chess match that we as viewers don't really get to see.
Yeah, no, exactly, and it's one thing which I kind of I've been pushing for a while in terms of like the graphics on TV as well, just aren't good enough in showing what you're going on, because you're watching it and you kind of like look at, you see the kind of timing score down the side and you're like, okay, but who's pitted, who hasn't pitted, what's the gap between these, where's this pit window, like kind of what happens if this person pits and where they're going to fall out. And that's kind of information you want to see it first, and then you can start explaining the story of what's actually going to happen in the race, because you'd be like, you can be shouting at the screen, why aren't they pitted? Why aren't they pitted yet? Pirelli said it was going to be 12 laps. But the reason why is because they're going to drop behind 5 cars who are all fighting each other, and you're just going to lose a lot of time.
I think we need to get Mike on a Zoom call during races, Matt, and then we can sound clever from listening to. Basically, we can just watch Mike's face, and when it drops or he starts yelling at the screen, we know that someone's done something wrong. Okay, so you're slightly just sidestepped out of the active strategist role, Mike. There, I've just stated, and I'm not a Red Bull fan, but I am an admirer of just how aggressive how proactive their strategy tends to be. Feel free to answer this however you want. Which team have the best strategy approach, or which teams impress you on the grid from a strategy point of view? Long pause from Mike Caulfield. There's political.
None of them.
Look, it would be difficult if I said, Mike, who's terrible, who sucks at strategy. I'm not doing that.
I mean, I do think, like, yeah, I agree with you. I think Red Bull's strategy over the last few years has been one of the best. It's definitely, they've kind of adjusted for all the situations. They've done the kind of lead in, they've done the challenging for the league, and then like you said, that bit where they weren't quite the fastest car, but they were still putting themselves in position to do it. So I think they've definitely got one of the best structures in place. I think Mercedes have done well over the years as well, though. It's always different, kind of going from, especially when you've been so dominant for a number of years, to then being a team which is then having to kind of make some considerations from what they didn't have to before. So it's that kind of changing in that mindset of where you were trying to make sure you didn't do anything stupid, because as a strategist as well, if you're racing for the win, the worst that can happen is chucking away the win. Whereas if you're in the midfield, you can try something that's a little bit more aggressive, and you go, okay, we could have got 7th, we got 8th instead. And they're like, no one really knows. You know yourself, and like personally, if it's me, I'm gutted if that happens. But you don't get the kind of media backlash when it does happen.
But if you get a podium from that, then you look like a genius.
Yeah, I mean, and this is kind of why strategy is such a. It's not just a kind of numbers-based science. I'm not going to say it's an art form, because that's a bit.
Do it.
Go on, go.
It's more of an art. Yeah.
No, but like it's there's a lot of personalities behind it as well. So I mean, you've got 10 strategists or 10 head of strategies on the grid, and if you like put cars all the same pace, and you gave like everyone had the day, and like you then ran practice, you ran quali, you've obviously got a grid run it. You'd probably get 60% of the strategists choosing one thing, 30% choosing another thing, 10% and 10% doing another thing. You'll still get a lot of different strategies, even though everyone had the same numbers and the same car pace, just because you'll have some people who are that little bit more aggressive. Some people might go for that, prefer to take that option where, right, this strategy will work one time in 100, but when it does work, we're going to look like kings. The rest of the time, we just look like a bit
Yeah. The Jensen button in the rain approach. Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, but and then because I remember I had, like, in theory, I had a conversation when we were in Haas in 2019. Yeah, 19 or 20, when the car wasn't very good anyway, one of the two. And like I was having a chat with it must have been 19. I was chatting with Kev, and he was kind of going, I don't care if I finish 11th. I'd rather try something and finish in the points than finish 11th. And like I was showing him these things, I was like, okay, this strategy here, like here, I've got this one strategy here, which requires every little DP thing. It's like, this happens here, this happens here, this happens. He's going, let's try. And I said to him, I said, yeah, this is one strategy out of 100,000 I've run here.
I love it.
It's like, so these are the odds of this actually happening. But he still wanted to try it anyway.
I love it.
And he came back after.
Did it work?
And it didn't. No idea, because it didn't.
Work. So you're like, okay, if these 12 miracles happen, we're P6 and we look like heroes.
Exactly, yeah. And that's it. But like, yeah, you kind of balance it up. And sometimes, I mean, there's more calculated approaches where like I'm being really exaggerating on some of the effects, but a lot of the times you do require like a safety car coming out in a really opportune moment, and everything. But if you don't try this, all you're going to do is end up 14th, having started 15th. So it's worth trying something for some people.
Well, I think sort of a classic example of that might have been last year at Albert Park with Albon changing going to the last lap, changing tires and winding up with points. So, like, what was your biggest jackpot, the longest odds strategy you ever ran that made you look like a king for a day?
So it wasn't so my one was the ballsy move in Hungary where we pitted up after the formation lap to get off the wet tires. We got a penalty for it, undeserved in my opinion. But we still got points with one car. Would have got double points if it weren't for the penalties. Yeah, but everyone else went onto the grid on wet tyres. We struck dries on, and then after 4 laps, we were running, I think it was 3rd and 4th. And obviously then the pace, I mean, and this was in 2020, but so the car was the worst car on the field. So it's not like, but it was the only chance of us getting points, and it was worth a risk. Yeah, let's take it.
All right, let's talk percentages. It's very common in Formula One that, you know, they say it's this much car, it's this much driver, and I think a lot of people settle around it's 85% car, but the driver can make a 15% difference, you know, from the best driver to the worst driver. Let's carve out a strategist piece of that pie. How much difference can a good strategist make to, I don't know, if Matt was doing it?
It's. I mean, obviously, I don't want to put myself out of a job, so it's a good chunk in that. But no, I mean,
easily 80%.
Easy, yeah. So, I mean, it's the most important factor.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
But no, I mean, it's like I said, there's potential for like getting points here and there, like in picking up, and you've all got to put it relative. But I say go back to that Haas year we had when the car was in awful in 2020 or 2021, even worse. And it was pretty hard because no matter what you did, you knew you were kind of fighting a losing battle because your car was just so far off. So in that sense, your strategists, you really haven't got much chance whatsoever. However, if you're in that kind of position where you're going for race wins or even a kind of strong midfield team, then the strategist does have, I think, quite a significant impact in what can be potentially go right. I mean, and I always kind of refer to it as well as like one driver. I won't name him, but he kind of. I never seem to get any credit when I did good strategies, but I always got the blame, obviously, when the strategies went wrong. So I kind of always refer it to like an airline pilot, that they're expected to land the plane. And so you're expected to get the good strategy. If you get it wrong, you're going to get in trouble.
Actually, it was a terrible question to ask, saying what percentage is down to the strategist when your last car was towards the back end of the grid, because you were hardly going to go, that was a great car with brilliant drivers, but because I just kept rolling the dice wrong, that's why it was at the back of the grid. Mike Caulfield, thank you so much for your time. It's been fascinating to get this insight, and people should follow you at Mike Caulfield F1. The links will be in the show notes below, but thank you very much for joining us in the shed.
No, thank you very much. No, it's been good. Cheers.